All right, we are live.
Hi, I'm Barrett Bro, the Executive Assistant for the Democratic Youth Coalition. We represent an inclusive national grassroots campaign of young activists participating in civic engagement programs that support democratic and progressive campaigns and causes. Programs include youth-led town halls, outreach, and issue-based campaigns, and coalition voting experience that empower youth to get involved in democracy. The youth vote is extremely important, not only for presidential elections, but for all future elections, and our work will help ensure that the United States continue to receive strong youth and student engagements. Today, I'm very happy to be hosting the youngest female to be running for Congress, Alexandra Hunt. Thank you for being here. Can you introduce yourself and tell us why and how you got involved with politics?
Sure. So my name is Alexandra Hunt. I'm running in PA3, which is most of Philadelphia. I never considered a run for public office. I work in public health. I was formerly a girls soccer coach. I've been a longtime community activist, community organizer, and my parents are both teachers. But I think at some point in a person's process for radicalization, you realize how personal policy is to every single person. And as it became more and more personal to myself, I started to consider running.
And what do you hope to accomplish if you do get elected?
A lot. One of the major pillars of my campaign is the New Deal for Education, which is going to completely change the landscape of education in the United States. It's going to increase funding to Title I and essentially move funding for public school education to the federal level, which we haven't seen done before, but it's something we need for equitable resources to all our public schools. It's also going to end the school to prison pipeline and encourage an environment that's about curiosity and education and not about punishment and following rules. It's also going to increase the baseline income for teachers, because I think teachers are the soul of our nation and deserve benefits and a living wage. It's going to increase resources for students with disabilities and also encourage an environment that is encouraging for students with disabilities rather than punitive as well. And so that's one of the major things that I would like to accomplish. Additionally, criminal justice reform is high on my agenda. To pull apart pieces of our criminal legal system that are just in place because it's the way that we've always done it. It's a punitive system, and it simply is cruel and inhumane to call justice locking someone up in prison for X amount of years or sometimes even life. Abolishing the death penalty. Medicare for all is high on my agenda. We need healthcare. We needed healthcare yesterday. We needed it last year. And now after surviving a pandemic, it's unfathomable that this is even up for debate. So those are kind of my major policy points.
Okay, our next group of questions are going to deal with climate change. The first one being, how do you think climate change is affecting Pennsylvania youth, and what are your plans to fight it?
Well, we have to act like the world is on fire, because it really is. We are seeing increased drought. We're seeing increased flooding, increased wildfires, increased harsh winter conditions, and just basically our world is becoming less and less viable, and it's not going to be here for our future generations. And we are running out of time. I mean, seriously running out of time to respond to it. So what youth in my district are facing is an increase in asthma and their ability to breathe properly. That's how climate is deeply affecting them. And then in a pandemic, when we have to wear masks to protect ourselves from sickness and virus, and also pollution for young people who have difficulty breathing and who have higher instances of having difficulty breathing than our older generations. It's really been a struggle and a decrease in enjoyment of everyday life.
Some would say that banning fracking would end more jobs than it is worth. What is your response to this, and do you think banning fracking is necessary?
Yes, absolutely. And also banning, when we think about policy, we tend to debate policy as if it happens in a vacuum, and policy doesn't work like that. So the Green New Deal that and the ban of fracking, there is a piece of the Green New Deal that is the federal jobs guarantee. So basically any jobs that were lost because of these changes as we adjust to a more sustainable country would be picked up by the federal jobs guarantee, and every person would be guaranteed a job. And what that could look like is there are community hubs in communities, and a person who needs a job goes to the community hub and says, I need a job, what's available? And they say, well, what can you do? And that can have a variety of things. They make a base pay of at least $15 an hour, probably more as we adjust for inflation and cost of living. And that the argument of a loss of jobs is just an attempt to undermine the damage that fracking does to our environment.
Okay, the next group of questions is going to be about Pennsylvania youth. So what do you think is the biggest problem facing Pennsylvania youth today?
The biggest, I kind of already touched on that. It's our education system, because and again, I go specifically to Philadelphia rather than all of Pennsylvania, but Philadelphia youth are not being set up to succeed in adulthood. And so with this new deal for education, kids don't have to go to college. They don't have to be college bound, and that's not a bad thing. They can choose to complete high school and then join the workforce. And so this new deal for education would not only make tuition-free public college an option, it would also encourage trade schools, which would just allow people to pursue various avenues instead of simply academia, and then completely canceling student debt, because that is a major burden that is falling on our young people.
And what would you say to youth or young people who want to get involved in politics and activism but aren't sure how?
I think you start with yourself. You start with, what do you know about yourself? What's important to you? And why is that important to you? Because there's so many different facets to policy and different areas of activism that you could be a part of as a young person. And so where is your little activism community? And once you know what, plants your feet on the ground in the mornings, and you're like, I'm going to get up and fight for this, that's where you go and get involved. You find a community group that cares about the same things that you care about. For me, mine was mass liberation. And you get involved that way. And then you have a community fighting for the change that you all want to see happen.
And what is your stance on paid internships?
I think that internships were originally designed to kind of contribute to our young people's imposter syndrome, that they are not adequate for their job. They're not skilled enough. They don't have enough experience. And so therefore they shouldn't be asking for more. They shouldn't be asking for better benefits. They shouldn't be asking for a higher wage. So I think that paid internships and valuing your interns are absolutely essential.
Okay, and the next few questions are just going to be like a rapid fire miscellaneous type of questions about policy, starting with, how do you think the pandemic has affected Pennsylvania as a whole?
Well, in my time in public health as a student, I think day one of pursuing my master's degree of public health, it was the awareness that we are not prepared for a pandemic, and that as a country, we had kind of said, oh, well, we'll be fine. We always know better. And as we saw, that wasn't the case. So in my opinion, I do not know how anyone could argue against this single payer healthcare system at this point. I don't understand how people can argue that we wouldn't be better able to respond to a pandemic without universal healthcare. We have totally botched our response to this pandemic. I mean, more so than just simply like burying our heads in the sand and ignoring the fact that we were very vulnerable to a potential pandemic. The vaccine rollout has been inequitable, and in some cases we've wasted so much money on vaccine that could have gone to other places in the world that desperately need vaccine as we combat this pandemic globally. And if we had a universal healthcare system, a single payer healthcare system, we could have accomplished that very easily. So whether it's at the state level of Pennsylvania or the federal level, that is the direction we need to move in.
Okay, and we are currently seeing the murder trial of Derek Chauvin take place. How do you think the outcome of this trial will come, and do you have any plans to fight racial injustice?
What do I think the outcome of this trial will
be?
Well, I'm not sure. I don't have very high hopes for seeing actual justice, even with the entire nation and a lot of the globe watching this trial. I don't anticipate accountability. And what was the second part of your question?
Do you have any plans to fight racial injustice?
Yes. Well, we have to talk about the role that policing plays in Black and brown neighborhoods, and the people talk about reimagine policing. Policing isn't broken. It's not a broken system. It's doing exactly what it was intended to do. It's intended for surveillance, it's intended for control, and it's intended for punishment. And when people talk about, these are high crime areas and that's why they need police, they're actually very overly policed areas that are, not even catching crime. It's criminalizing Black and brown skin and neighborhoods. So this is actually a patriarchal construct. And that is the idea of ruling with fear, to govern with fear. And so a matriarchal construct isn't ruling with fear, it's ruling with love. And that is what justice is. That's where justice is born from. So that's what restorative justice is. That's the basis of restorative justice. And it's matriarchal. And accountability is also matriarchal. So when you fight for racial justice, you have to keep in mind what accountability and restorative justice looks like.
Do you think creating adequate housing for all Pennsylvanians is a big issue, and how will you plan to do that if so?
Yes, absolutely. Housing, and again, I'm going to speak to Philadelphia and my district. Housing is such a critical issue in Philadelphia, and it is all by policy choice. It's not that we don't have enough buildings. We have buildings crumbling to blight and being unused. And it's simply because we're not investing in getting people off the streets and into sustainable houses. And we have to think about why this neglect takes place and who typically faces housing instability. And it's Black and brown communities, it's drug users, it's formerly incarcerated people, it's sex workers. And these are some of the most marginalized people within our community. So we have to create permanent, not temporary housing options that also allow for a person's autonomy, because the shelters that they have in place, you have to be drug-free, which in some instances, sobriety is actually not possible and not medically safe. You cannot use any sort of drugs. You cannot participate in sex work if that is your job. And it just, there's curfews, there's regulations over who can and can't visit you, and you're in the confines of your own home. So we need to both have houses and the availability of temporary housing for people, but it also can't be caught up in this system of surveillance, control, and punishment. And it has to be, just let people thrive in their own home.
Thank you so much for joining us here today, and good luck with the rest of your campaign.
Thank you. That it?
Mhm.